Welcome to The Independent Musician. Our weekly podcast will focus on the independent artist and the music market at large. You'll hear from those artists as well as music execs, tech experts, and marketing leaders from around the globe. We'll discuss what it takes to make it in the biz and how you can overcome obstacles as you progress your craft, all the while making it interesting and fun. Now, here's your host, Mark Skoda.
Hi, this is Mark Skoda, and you are experiencing another edition of The Independent Musician. Today we've got a great guest I'm looking forward to, Mr. Geno Gruber, who is out in Sacramento, California. Geno, I actually saw his TikTok, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. Rock Talk to Pop Talk. Geno, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
So I obviously reached out to you. We, as I've shared with you, are an independent record label and do a lot of gigs with people and from different areas of the business, from artists to promoters to music people. And I've not had any TikTok people on here. So when I saw your stuff, and I follow you and I love what you do and your storytelling, I thought it'd be great for the audience to not only hear a little bit about how you got started, but also a little bit of the personal side, since you have a daughter, Maddie, who's actually an artist as well, trying to make it in the business. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself first, on your background, because obviously you didn't come to TikTok as a TikToker. You're a fellow that's a little older, family man, and decided to embrace this new technology. So I'd love to hear about what you did before TikTok and how you got there.
Well, what I do for my income is I'm a business coach. So I ran a successful heating and air conditioning business, and then we sold, and then so since then I've been helping other contractors. So that's what I do for a living, and fun because I enjoy it immensely. But what got me into the TikTok is my daughter as you already mentioned, is a musician, and she and I talk music all the time, and we were having a debate, or I shouldn't say debate, discussion, whatever, about what is the most influential album of all time. Well, that was really hard to come up with one album. We ended up coming up with a list of 20 albums. And then I made this art piece for her. I bought all the CDs and put them in this wall art. Cost me way more than I anticipated it costing. But so what I decided to do when I did that is I thought, I'm going to do a TikTok for each one of the albums we have on the list. So I did that, and I started getting a lot of feedback. And I thought, well, this is kind of fun. So I kept doing that with no real goal in mind. But as I started getting a following, I realized, there can be some power in this, and I could maybe do some good for some artists. I've already reached out to a couple other people doing what I do and said, hey guys, maybe if we all can get behind an artist, we can have an impact on their lives. Now with I've got like 80,000 followers. You'd mentioned Patrick Hicks to me earlier. He's got 300,000, but that's still not enough, I think, to really have an impact on someone's lives.
Right. That's right.
I think we're going to need a couple million followers to be able to have any impact to move the needle for an artist. That's my goal.
Well, it's interesting because obviously you talk about the fact that it starts out of this discussion with your daughter, and I'd love to hear of those 20 albums what you thought was the number one. But your style is interesting because, each of the folks that I follow and the algorithm, as I mentioned to you, is pushing people like yourself who tell stories about rock, tell stories about music historically. And it is interesting because what I think you and others like your approach to this business bring is a sense of history that is missing today, right? We have these instantaneous success stories, supposedly, on the like of America's Got Talent and The Voice. We don't see much of many of them afterwards because they haven't earned the right. And yet I think what you do in particular in the storytelling that you bring forward and the sort of background information on these various artists and music and songs is you demonstrate all too clearly that the effort, the musicality, the ability, the talent, and the perseverance, most of all, the thing that keeps coming through in everything you shared constantly, as others do, is the perseverance necessary to become successful.
That goes with every part of life, doesn't it?
It does indeed. I mean, whether you're doing heating and air conditioning or business coaching or TikTok. And I know even in my own situation, building a record label from scratch after I decided that technology wasn't being used effectively. I'm a tech guy in my background. I have a day job as well. And I think that it's a passion that we have that tends to drive us towards this innovation and these new approaches. I was interested, though, as I sort of look, you bring a lot of history. Now, you've got to get prepared for these. You've got to sketch out an idea. Where do you draw the inspiration from for a particular TikTok? And where do you get the information that supports your storyline?
Wow. So that's kind of difficult to answer because every day is a little different. I might start the day with one idea and then it totally goes somewhere else. Like I'll think of a song or I'll think of something that inspires me, but then when I'll do some research on it, I realize that's kind of a boring story. So then I'll start digging in, and it's a lot of deep dives and web searches is what I do.
So you act as a natural aggregator in storytelling. I mean, which of course is exactly what storytelling is. It's the communication of facts and figures and frankly the color, if you will, of the story that helps people understand very effectively what took place. And I enjoy that about what you do and your stylistically sort of matter of fact presentation. What as an individual, what genres did you grow up on? What did you enjoy, and what drove you towards music generally?
Well, it's interesting. My real dad, my mom remarried, but his whole family were musicians. You know, my grandpa played accordion in big bands, and like the whole family played at Carnegie Hall, you know, years ago when my dad was just a kid. So he was always playing his accordion or saxophone or something, but never introduced me to it. In fact, you know, disturbed childhood. You know, my parents drank too much and other stuff. So never gave me the opportunity to learn an instrument, although they always had instruments around me. And only now I still won't say I can play guitar. I say I play with a guitar.
That's like me. I used to play piano, but nobody asks you to sit down and play the Great Concerto at any parties lately.
So, but growing up, my mom was a big, Stevie Wonder, Commodores, Ella Fitzgerald. Yeah, that's what she played all the time, soul music. Mm-hmm. And so when I was growing up, that was blaring out the stereo all the time. And I can't say I was into it at that time, but now I totally appreciate what she introduced me to. But as I got older, I think about the first music I really started getting into was when I was about 10. So Steve Miller, you know, and then of course Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, the Bee Gees. Yeah. That was when I started getting into music. I don't know, what was it, junior high? Some friends introduced me to Van Halen, and my mind was blown. So yeah, I've never pigeonholed myself to one genre. You know, I'll say there's not a lot of country I like, although there is some great country music. That twangy sound just doesn't appeal to me. So other than that, I'm into about everything.
I like country generally, but not specifically. I don't go out of my way to listen to it. I am still listening to most of the classic rock songs, largely because at the end of the day, for me, growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, it was always about rock. Yeah. It was a time as I was growing up. I'm a little bit older than you, but I was growing up in at the time, Kent State, Fort Edmonton, Ohio, with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. We had the riots in Cleveland, Ohio, when I was 12 years old during the Civil Rights Movement. So all of those things sort of. The Vietnam War and the protests, you know, I'm in my 60s, so having lived through that period of time in the Midwest, in Cleveland specifically, rock was sort of a commentary on society, right? I think one of the reasons rock music was so great back then was largely due to the fact that it was impacting society, right? The music was fantastic. The musicianship was extraordinary. The lyrics themselves, of course, reflected and frankly were a commentary on society at large. And I think from my perspective, even as I talk to my own son's band, rock today needs to be reformed, not in terms of its musical ability or performance ability, but in terms of the social commentary that I think is necessary even in these days where things seem to be spiraling out of control all the time. How can rock music provide a commentary in the context of current day challenges? I mean, we're sitting here on the precipice of World War III, for instance. And as you as a father and I as a father, I shake my head because it's all over again. I go back to the days when grade school when we were diving under our desks supposedly to hide from nuclear attack, and we had the Bay of Pigs, and of course the Russian missile crisis. But music, I think, informs a period of time and people's lives. But it also, I think, as through your storytelling, has impacted so many individuals as they've moved through their own careers. And I think that's what's also very interesting. You talk a lot about that. I think you really sort of open up to people the challenges many musicians have had, either in terms of acceptance or their own ability. What are some of the things that you've talked about in your TikToks that were most impactful for you individually as you sort of dug deep and found out about a piece of music? What were some of the things that really sort of lay on you at this day and age as you think back to the many, 3 minutes that you give us?
That's tough because sometimes, someone say, what was your TikTok on today? I'm like, I can't even remember. So, for instance, I like when I learn something I didn't know. Like, for instance, I posted something in the last couple of days on Peter Gabriel's Rosanna Arquette. I remember growing up thinking that the song Rosanna was about Rosanna Arquette. Mm-hmm. I come to find out it wasn't. They just went along with that rumor because she was dating the keyboard player. But, he didn't write the song. But they went along with, yeah, it's me. But Peter Gabriel wrote In Your Eyes, actually about Rosanna Arquette.
I'll be darned.
So when I find stuff like that out, I always think, oh, this is interesting. I'm sure somebody else will find it interesting as well. And so I'll do a story on it.
Yeah, you're obviously really focused on your TikTok activity. My question also, are you doing anything on YouTube now? Are you looking at and considering some of the potential changes and impacts on TikTok from a political area here in this country? Because obviously people are talking about banning TikTok for security reasons. Are you expanding beyond the platform?
I haven't yet. I think I'm going to do the reels on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And again, this is all kind of a new thing. I had no idea. I started this in October, and now I have 80,000 followers, and it just blows my mind that.
Well, you do it well, man. I mean, you've got this unassuming persona on air, right? And you're sitting there in your chair and you're kind of looking away from the camera, which I look at the context for me as I watch you, and then you look back, it's sort of like, let me tell you about something else I found. And then I think about it a little bit and then I come back, okay, let me tell you about this one too. And I kind of enjoy that. So it's entertaining, and I know you're not an entertainer, but it comes off as entertaining. And of course the storytelling is, really terrific. And then finally, as you do in most of the videos I've watched, you ask people to comment themselves. You ask for feedback, which I think is important because people want to feel like they're part of something, that they're buying into something, and they can make a difference as well.
Yeah, and I'm learning a lot from people, their comments. They'll say this or that. I'm like, well, I didn't know that. And then I'll go search it, so it's fun.
Right, exactly. I think that's very cool. I think it is interesting because obviously music is so important to so many people, and I think it also gives us a sense of our lives, right? Time. I go back, as I was interviewing one individual, we talked about how music, you can reimagine a moment in time. I go back to a song, Cherish, from the Association, and a girl that I was dating at the time, Cheryl, and every time I hear that song, I still remember dating her at 16 years old, all those sorts of things, which is fascinating, of course. And so I think music and storytelling within music is very cool for a lot of people because it does define moments of their life.
Yeah, I mean, a song can bring back, smells and emotions, and it puts me in places that I hadn't thought about in a long time. Like when you hear a song hasn't been on your radar for decades, like, oh my God, I haven't heard this song in forever. And it instantly transports you to a different time.
Yeah, what's interesting too, of course, is that, we're sitting here today and people are still watching these legacy acts. They're still selling out venues and large venues. And I keep asking myself, why is that? And of course, the answer that keeps coming back for me is that these great lyrics and great songs are timeless. Nobody's going to be singing the lyrics to WAP in 50 years. But
Right.
but we still sing I Want to Hold Your Hand, right? I mean, we still talk about the White Album. We still talk about, Eric Clapton and many, many others. And I think that to me is a defining element of how great that period of time was. Although I have to say, I listen to a lot of 60s yet too, because I still enjoy it. And I thought to myself, I was talking to my son who's 17 and been playing drums since he's 4. I said, you realize, son, I said, my father used to listen to Frank Sinatra and I thought that was old. I'm still listening to stuff from the 60s and it is now 60 years later. I said, that scares me a little bit. I said, but it's still popular. People still listen to it and still enjoy it. And the stories that come out of that are remarkable because at that time, everybody was struggling.
Yeah. You said something earlier too about how, artists in the old days, they were talking about something. They had an agenda. They're talking, especially the 60s, this whole anti-war stuff,
Yes.
whatever. The artists sung about this. And in rock today, I mean, rock is all but dead, sadly, and someone like Jack White, who's, I guess, from your part of the world there.
Yeah.
I love his music, but it's not very political necessarily. However, I'm not a huge, I can't say this, I got to say it properly, hip hop. I don't get a lot of it. A lot of it is just bad to me.
Right.
And that's not because there's not great hip hop music. It's because those guys they're cranking out these tunes so fast compared to like what my daughter will do. Like on SoundCloud, you'll find a hip hop artist, they'll put out something new every week, every few days even. My daughter will spend a year or more on an album to come out with, 10, 12 tracks. But so my point there is there's a lot of hip hop that's just cranked out and it's not good. But a lot of these kids are telling stories. They're talking about the changes today. And I think in, our generation, we're not really listening to it, but it's still there.
Yeah. Well, you raise a good point. I think what's interesting, and I've had some discussions, rock is actually, I think, is in resurgence to some degree. It's not going to be a dominant form of music, but I think, streaming services have allowed this niching to occur across so many different artists, and you can build your own persona and own fan base very effectively. You may never sell out stadiums. I think that's something that a lot of the old guard talk about, that we're not going to see these stadium bands anymore. Even groups like Greta Van Fleet, I followed them from the very early days. They were pretty cool. I think they've gone off the road a little bit. There's another band that I particularly like right now, which is The Warning, 3 sisters out of Mexico. They've been tremendous, very light metal sort of thing. But to your point, I don't think people are defining new ideas within the rock genre today. I also think, to your point, is that hip hop and rap in particular, where you buy a beat and you throw lyrics over it and you get it out, it's more of a consumable. It is a moment in time, and as a result, rock, on the other hand, you have to have parts, you have multiple instruments, you have obviously vocals and backups, you have the lyrics to write, the music to write, the production, the multiple takes, and so all of that invests an enormous amount of time and effort over and above what typically comes out of some of the hip hop artists and some of the rap artists. And I think in that sense, one of the reasons that I believe to this day that many of these legacy acts are still touring and still being very well received is because people embrace a broader sensitivity to more musicality. I know that I talk a lot to people in Europe. I lived overseas for about 13 and a half years, and I've got some good friends there and some people in the business I talk with regularly. And Europe is very interesting because unlike America, where we are swipe right 20 seconds and onward, Europe tends to be more considerate, right? And so we're looking at things like doing tours over in Europe because people just enjoy rock music still. They enjoy bands, they enjoy performances, and they have time for it. And I think that's probably something that's really fundamentally changed in America from my point of view. And one of the reasons that rock, which oftentimes has a 30-second open, right, before you ever hear a lyric. You people say, well, I can't listen to this. Where's the lyric? And that's not the way rock music is intended to be performed. Maddie, talk about having her work. How long has she been a musician? And obviously some of the things that she's doing. Be interested to hear about how you support her as a father.
Well, yeah. So she's well, first of all, I knew there was something special about her musically day one. So at 3 months, she was colicky. I'd come home from work. My wife at the time would be in tears because this baby had not stopped crying all day. She'd hand her to me. She'd grab a beer, from the fridge and head back to the room just to decompress. And I just throw in music, and I was so happy to hold this beautiful little baby I had. And what was interesting is I'd put on music, and if it was a good song, something that we really enjoy, she stopped crying. But in between songs, or if it was, like Starships, We Built This City, I've never liked that song. And my daughter cried through it at 3 months. So I thought that was interesting. I'm like, wow, she just gets music early.
Right.
So anyway, we always put her in front of instruments and stuff. Bought a piano, put a piano in the house when she was 3, and she was instantly picking stuff out. So I've supported her that way. In high school, she actually put out her first album. She did it all herself. She borrowed some money from me to print the CDs, and but paid me back. So she made a business of it, early on, and then she just kept at it. She's now working on her 4th album. Her last one, she's for the first time was collaborating with some people. Everything she's done before was just her playing everything but the drums. But this last album, she actually met somebody over the internet, and she went to Liverpool, England for a month and recorded, some stuff, and came back over here. So, and I've just been supporting her the whole time. I look at it this way. There comes a point in life where you have to start being an adult. You got to pay your rent. You got to do all this. When you're young, you got this opportunity. You have time. You don't need the same amount of money. You can live in a house with 3 other people. And anyway, I guess what I'm trying to get at is I encourage her, well, both my kids, pursue your dreams. Do it while you can. Don't have regrets saying, I wish I would have. So
nobody wants to. I tell my son the same thing. He, at 18 months old, his grandmother asked him what he wanted for Christmas, and he said, drum. He got his very first drum at that point. He's been drumming ever since. I remember at 2 years old, 3 years old as a toddler, we'd come out of church on Sunday, and across the street was a retail center, and that we would see the local high school drum line practicing there. And when he heard those drums, we'd have to go across the street, and he would stand there mesmerized, holding my hand, just watching those people play drums. At 4 years old, we put him into our church conservatory to start learning drums. We had a great guy, James, who was a wonderful man, helped Matthew move along. And at 9 years old, he played his first 3-hour gig at the Hard Rock Cafe on Beale Street in Memphis, which was very cool. And so he's been drumming ever since. And as I tell him, I said, you only have your youth for a short time. If you don't chase it now, you'll never chase it. I mean, I shared with him, I said, my own experience. I said, I didn't go to college full time until I was 23. And then I went right away for 4 years, did a master's degree, and started a PhD before I left the country for 13 and a half years. I said, you're 17, man. I says, chase your dream for the next 6 years, 7 years, figure out what happens, because nobody chases their dream to be a bank teller. I said, chase your musical dream or whatever you want. And I said, give it a shot, because right now you have my support, your mother's support, and you have your youth. And I said, there's plenty of time. You're going to likely live to a ripe old age, and there'll be plenty of time to do other things if this doesn't work out for you, but do what you love. And I said, at the end of the day, music is something, that's why I played football. I got a nice 9-inch scar and no cartilage. That's what I got for football. I said, but at 70 some years old, you're still playing stadiums for the old guys, 80s even. I mean, as I we went to the Kiss concert in May before COVID, the year before COVID, and I remember thinking to myself, I see all these young people just loving the music, loving Kiss, loving their entertainment. And I thought to myself, with white paint and black wigs, you can look like you're in your 20s again.
That's true.
But yeah, I think that's great. I think, it's music is a tough business. Probably, I don't think it's any tougher than it was in the past. I think what's changed in my view, and in the sense that, first of all, it's become more homogenous, right? More people can participate because of streaming. So you got 60,000 songs every day being put up on Spotify, for instance. And the other thing is that the big labels are no longer, because they can't make money on album sales, they're no longer willing to go along with a band in particular and to let them mature through a period of time before they get their first hit. Those days are gone. They want your numbers on your social media to be right. They want your ticket sales to be right. They want you to have the appropriate streaming numbers and that you're ready to go and they can put you into a new channel, and that's about it. And that is what I think has been the toughest part about what's going on in the current music environment.
Yeah, you're spot on. So here's an observation I've made. And again, got to talk about my daughter because this is what I can relate to. On Jack White's last tour, in fact, he now married the artist. Olivia Jean was opening for him. And she's got a great look. They're good musicians. But in my opinion, the songs are just okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I was interested in to see what kind of growth she would be gaining, on Spotify was my measuring stick while she's opening for Jack White. Let's see how many new Spotify followers she would get during that tour. My daughter actually gained more followers during that tour than Olivia Jean did, and my daughter wasn't touring. So that tells me, okay, the music's good, right, but she's still not getting those big breaks. It's now she has a worldwide following. I mean, she was selling CDs almost. There was a little spike. She had this video go. In fact, this is a fun little story. If you ever watched a Green Day concert, they'll pull kids up onto the stage with them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
They pulled my daughter.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So that video went nuts and it brought a lot of people to her YouTube channel. And so she was selling, on a weekly basis, a handful of CDs to Russia and, Brazil and, mailing them. She's actually mailing these things every week. But so a record label, though, she had, when she was in LA, she had a promoter or something say, okay, well, let's have you play this. Let's see what happens. Well, the place was empty for the most part. It was a Tuesday night. The show was at like 5:00 on a Tuesday night. It was just this really odd time and nobody came. And so they're like, okay, well, you're not worth putting time into, because they want to see a line around the block to get into a venue. Well,
that's right.
That means you gained popularity in one little place, like in the old days, like Van Halen, all these guys playing at the Whiskey, in LA. It's different today. She's got, although it's really dwindled down. I mean, at one point she had over 150,000 monthly listeners on her Spotify.
Yeah. By the way, that is interesting because that changes every month. You have to climb that. You have to climb that mountain every single month with Spotify. That's one problem in terms of how that measures. Because if you haven't released something in the past few weeks, you can't get those new listeners to stream again. So it's.
Right.
I've always looked at that with some skepticism. But to your point, I think is exactly right. It's. I think for me, and I tell people this all the time, it's really about getting out there and building your following. So whether it's a regional area or a state or several states, build your following, build your team, build your fans, build your super fan. At the end of the day, you want those 1,000 people, not 100,000. You want those 1,000 people that will buy your merch, buy your CDs, come to your shows, and spend $100 a year on your merch, on your shows, on other things. Yeah. Because then you're at $100,000 a year job.
So you bring up an interesting discussion, if I could.
Yeah,
so
sure.
On her last tour, she did, I don't know, it was like Arizona, California, Arizona, Utah, Seattle, Oregon, up into Vancouver, Canada. It was brutal. I bought her a little minivan that she drives around in, and they're living like, homeless people, basically.
Yeah, I know. Our lead singer was doing the same thing that we have right now.
Yeah.
I know exactly. They were living like the 60s, okay? Let's be honest.
Yeah. so she did that. And then at the end of the tour, she's like, Dad, I don't like touring like that. You show up in Prescott, Arizona on a Wednesday night and, you get 20 people in the crowd.
Right.
To her credit, she's saying, is that worth my time? She has had success building her online presence. So, and I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm thinking, well, if you could play for thousands, like in a festival, but, she doesn't even really know how to do that. She's an introverted person. And I think today you got to be good at promoting yourself online. And that takes a certain personality. And my daughter, when she's not on stage, she's really quiet.
Well, I think you're right. I think, first of all, it's about the performance, right? And it is interesting, as I've booked gigs for my son's band and for other bands, there's the bar scene, quote unquote. Everybody wants to get to the larger venues. The very big venues are controlled by Ticketmaster, and of course, which is owned by Live Nation. So You're not going to get there. So you have to be satisfied with what I call as the realistic and achievable results, and that is get those 100 to 500 person venues that you can go out to play and get people to follow you. Because at the end of the day, you can make a living doing that, actually. You're not going to get wealthy, but you can make a living doing that. And I think part of this is not just to get wealthy anymore. I think there was a great interview I saw of Gene Simmons from Kiss, and he talked about the days of, making all the money and having all the verticals like they did. And he said, those are gone. Yeah. He said, nobody's going to do that anymore. Now, that is not to say that there are not individual artists who do. They absolutely exist, but nothing like before. I mean, we're not, we may see that occur again. We may see that one band that comes back and does a stadium tour. But one of the things we're looking at, for instance, is to go up and tour Europe, tour UK, England, obviously Belgium, Holland as well, because there's a lot more interest, and although it's more expensive, there's a lot more interest from people to follow a band and to support a band there. So I think, I don't think the answer is out there yet. That's the other reality. I think that many of the stories you tell, right? People started off, they were dissed. They were told, you're no good, you shouldn't be doing this. They basically had, 2 nickels in their pockets. So a lot of the people start off where we are today. And I tell my son, I said, you haven't slept in a trailer. You haven't had to do any of that because you have a house, you have a parent, you have family. And I said, so at the very least, you're not looking for your next $250 to fly to LA so that you can go ahead and audition for a band like the Eagles did, right? Living in apartments together and living above Jackson Brown.
Yeah, Jackson Brown, yeah.
Right? That's one of the greatest stories I ever heard, that. And of course, working for Linda Ronstadt as backup musicians. Yeah. I don't think things have changed that drastically. I think, however, more people are offering themselves up as artists. And I think that's what's changed over time. Because in the past, we had a lot of bands, but we didn't have the sort of absolute explosion of talent that we have today. People just loving it and interested in it because of the social media, because of streaming, and frankly, just because I think more people love music.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. And so recently I interviewed Jimmy Douglas, who was, he's got 4 Grammys he's a mixer producer guy, worked with, from Cream on up to Justin Timberlake. I mean, I just learned yesterday he worked with Peter Gabriel, but he was talking about how in his mind, it's so much easier today because of streaming. An artist can just go out there and put an album out now.
Yes.
You don't need a record label. On the other side of that, though, it's kind of harder because even with a record label, it's hard to get really promoted. In fact, you have a label. I mean, you are a label. So
exactly
what I'm talking about. Yeah.
One of the reasons, we did, just as a side note, when I started this label, the whole rationale was the artist keeps their streaming numbers, the artist keeps their merchandise, the artist keeps all of their IP, that is their songs. I don't take anything of that. We basically are at a low value of what I call subscription, and then we offer marketing services and support for the artist through our label, through merchandising, through social media management, all the technology we bring, because the artists couldn't buy that themselves individually. And by the way, they probably wouldn't know how to use it. So my view was, for the love of my son, I did that, right? I started because I'd been paying a lot of money, found out that it wasn't the way to go, wasn't getting what I thought I was going to get. So I said, I can do this. I'm a business guy. I've written more business plans like people write short stories. And that's how I built Iron Gate Records, and then started the radio station and started the podcast that we're doing here and now, because all of it pointing back to the artist, giving them a vehicle, a structure that they can be, and hopefully help them be more successful than they might otherwise be on their own. And to your point, you don't have to have a label, but the label, in our case, we distribute through Universal Music Group, so they have some cachet there. The fact that they're with a label has some cachet in terms of their own promotion. The fact that they have access to services that they might not otherwise be able to get individually or as easily, or even know how to use properly. Those are the things that I bring to bear. And frankly, I treat every one of my artists the same way I treat my son. So it's for the love of a family, if you will. And that is something I think that people have appreciated, and that I've sort of brought to bear here as we've moved forward as a label. And to your point, although I will say that most labels today, when you see what's going on, they're buying catalogs. They're buying those streaming numbers because they're treating it just as an annuity that they can go ahead and do an M&A analysis on and say, what's the discounted cash flow and what's the future distribution that I can offer? So they're paying $500 million, $800 million for catalogs. There are new labels springing up that are just basically aggregated funds to go out and buy artist catalogs so they can begin selling music into other areas of industry. And that, I think, is what's been driving a lot of the economics of the business today. It is interesting also to note that the CEO of Universal Music Group made a comment in an interview just this past 2 weeks ago, I believe. He spoke about the issue that somehow the streaming business model is not working for artists. And that ultimately we have to think about, as he said, we have to think about how do we get the artists compensated in a fair fashion so that they can make a living at this. He said, we haven't figured that out, but we need to figure that out, because ultimately it's the artist who provides the content that we sell and distribute.
Yeah. Well, you obviously know that they don't get squat from Spotify. It's such small checks, and we have to find another way. But here we are as individual. We're the music lovers, right? Yeah. Now, maybe you and I'm imagining guys of our age, we have a little bit more income than others. I could pay $50 a month for a service like that. Most people can. Like if you're in your 20s, 30s, you're not going to spend $50 a month for a streaming service, which is interesting because we would have spent that much money on a new CD.
Well, that's
each month.
That's the point. I still have, my son listens to modern vinyl. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And he said, Dad, I got this. I said, yeah, because I never got rid of any of my albums. I bought new albums all the time. I had the big stereo speakers. I even bought surround sound, from my paper route money. Okay. That's so my point is, there was the tactile experience of waiting for that album to be released. I can remember at Tower Records hanging out on a Friday night before midnight because you could be first in when they had a big records break. We had in Cleveland, Ohio, we had and still is there. It's WMMS, the Buzzard, when they were first on air as an FM station, one of the early FM stations. They would play the entirety of an album. That was their stick. They would play the entirety of the album, not a song. Every album they played front and back, and and they had the very coolest, very deep bass mics. They would talk. This is WMS, the Buzzard, and so they do this whole thing. But I think people's attention spans. We had more time. We spent more time, and I think that's what's changed today as well. Right? I've talked about this a lot of times to my artists. People have a financial budget. They have a time budget. And those two things have to be brought together to either spend it on a sports event or family or your food or your house or a event like a concert. And then when we have the value of the concert dollars going through the roof, we know that there's the dynamic pricing model now, which sometimes can cost people hundreds to thousands of dollars. You may only go to one concert a year. So now what happens to all the other people who are trying to do $20 or $30 at the door, right? And this is I think where we are. We are in a moment of time where the business is not quite sure where it's going to go, and yet we have more and more content being created every single day.
So how do we do it?
Well, that's why I have these podcasts and why I talk to people like yourself and people who are engaged. I think at the end of the day, I want to come back to the very first idea you had, which is we need to create these ecosystems, right? I talk about with all the artists, you've got to find those 1,000 super fans, those people who will start a fan club for you, show up at every one of your shows, buy your merchandise. You talk about, your efforts in talking with Patrick and others about how do you create an ecosystem of people telling stories that can help break new artists, right? And create that ability, because that is a game changer. Even the case of TikTok now, quote unquote, going viral. It doesn't happen as much anymore because there's over 1.5 billion users of TikTok now. And so the virality that might have occurred early on in the days are now becoming more and more restrictive because the algorithm pushes what I call more and more of less and less towards you, right? It's why I'm seeing more people like yourself suddenly showing up on my For You page, right? And so I think with the change in the algorithm, and then we find out that the Chinese can make anything go viral they want to, right? So that's
right.
The game is rigged as well. So I think to your point, Geno, is that you can actually begin to make those impacts by ultimately building your audience, building sort of the content that you do, and then ultimately figuring out how to find those new artists that you really want to tell the story about and break them. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that is how you use the power of social media to break new artists, because your following obviously likes what you do, and therefore putting a new artist in the context of what I'll refer to as story time, right? Story timing the new artist may give them that ability to sort of break through, and then people suddenly start listening. I tell the story all the time. I said, you have to find that one hit. I don't mean become a one-hit wonder, but your entire catalog becomes more valuable when you have that one hit, because now people come back and say, what else did they do that might be interesting to me? So I think this is still evolving. I don't think even the big guys don't have an answer. And based on that interview I watched with UMG's CEO, they do not have the answer as to where we go. But I think it starts with some ideas like you've just shared with this audience. You and others who are doing sort of your focused efforts around bands and about music generally could be influencers, right, in the future, and begin to take in other artists like Maddie, like my son's band, and others may be good enough that you have interest in, not to be a gatekeeper, but to be an enabler.
Yeah. Well, if I could have any impact, I would love to. I mean, doing what I do for a living, the money, of course, everybody knows consultants get paid well, right? But that isn't the motivator anymore. Probably wasn't ever the motivator. It's when you help someone, when you help someone to going bankrupt and their business turns around, they sell it for $40 million. That brings me so much joy, having helped someone like that. And if I could do that in music,
maybe one of the things we come out of this is we talk about how we build that ecosystem. How do we pull together guys like yourself and Patrick and others? And I think that would be a brilliant idea. It's something maybe we could dialogue about offline later and create that, because the other thing that happens, and what frankly just it doesn't piss me off, but it is not something I embrace, is paying influencers to push your music. Now, that is standard stuff that goes on around here. You can go out and buy influencers, and it doesn't guarantee you anything. It's just you get somebody talking about your music or and in some cases, I guess it works. But the influencer is the one that makes the money, not the person that's trying to be found.
Right.
And I think that's because obviously I can advertise with influencers all day long if I want to spend enough money.
Well, and that's basically the payola, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what was going on decades ago. So, and not to say, I mean, there's a lot of great music that we probably wouldn't have heard if it wasn't for payola. But when you've got just an artist that's making great music and people want to hear it, and it's all organic growth, I don't know. Although I guess as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, even if we have this big group that says, okay, here's the artist we want to promote because we believe in them, nothing in it for us, that's still sort of a payola in a sense, meaning we control what people hear.
Well, but that at the end of the day, channels. I mean, that's just the reality, right? You got to. It's a passion project. I don't sit here doing this podcast because it gets me any money. I do this because I really want people to find the long form interesting, talk to interesting people like yourself, have this real time discussion where maybe new ideas are sparked or new approaches are generated, and people can learn something from it, and then it's out there forever. For me, it is about helping people at some point in your life, and you're there. I think I'm there. I'm going to be 69 this year in July. I am full of more piss and vinegar than guys half my age. But at the end of the day, I'm at the point in my life and my career where I want to make a difference in other people's lives. And it doesn't mean that I expect anything for it. I don't expect $1 in my pocket for it. But if I can help somebody achieve their dream, damn, I've done a job well done. You know, I've satisfied my own yearning to be helpful, and I've satisfied that person's desire to get the foot up and to work hard. And that's why I did the record label. That's why I work with these artists. I don't have any magic. I tell them that up front. I said, boys and girls, I don't have any magic. I said, all you can get is what I can offer, and I will work hard for you and provide all of this content and all this approach. I do a show for our radio station called, Rising Star Radio, and that's where I have some of the young guys come on. I talk to them, do an interview, and I help them. It's interesting. I've had a couple of young guys who've never been interviewed before, Geno, and I help them and make them sound like they always have been interviewed. And in the sense that it gives them some ability to know how to handle questions, how to answer. And then we debrief afterwards. And I tell them, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to think about. So that they can begin to build the chops necessary to sort of be able to handle themselves in press conferences or other inquiry, right? And that's also important to me. And I think all of this is about helping people, as you point out, helping your daughter, helping my son, helping other artists. And at the same time, learning from all of the extraordinary stories that you tell. So as we get to closing here, I want to go back. Do you remember the 20 albums? Do you have that in front of you? I'd love to hear what those 20 albums were. And
man, it's funny.
Even a couple of them.
I don't have it in front of me. And the funny thing is, like, doing all the research I've been doing since I did that list, I'm like, oh man, these guys should have been on the list. Like, the Pixies are not on my list. But after learning more about the Pixies, I'm like, damn it, they should have been on there, But I know it started with Little Richard, not Elvis. We agreed Little Richard was the first big one. But I can't remember all the albums off the top of my head. But
well, I hope the White Album was up there with the Beatles, because that's one of my favorites. I listen to that all the time. That was a cool
it's funny. Our rule was you could only have one album from a band for the list.
Yeah.
And so for the Beatles, we did Sgt. Pepper.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. That's right. That's equally good. Different, but good. Yeah. Cool. First of all, I want to tell you, keep doing what you're doing. Move your content to either another streaming service, because you don't want to be lost if it happens, and build your fan base there as well, because I think it is important to have that other additional out. And, keep doing what you're doing. I'm enjoying your stories. I enjoy everything you're doing. What's your next podcast coming that you haven't released yet, or your next TikTok?
See, that's the interesting thing. I won't know until I start. I won't know until I sit down to do it, which will be in the next couple hours.
Okay. Well, good. I appreciate that. You'll have to hit me up. Yeah. Geno, I appreciate your time today. This has been a really enjoyable conversation. I will noodle on a little bit about how we build this ecosystem. I think that's something we ought to explore. Maybe we get Patrick on. I'm going to be interviewing him next week, I think. And
awesome.
And obviously, I think it's something I'll talk with him about too in the interview. But I think it might be something we want to discuss. Figure out how to create the virtual audience to break new artists. I think that's really what it's about, because it's all about networking. I think that could be very cool. Geno, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I look forward to hearing more stories from you, as always. Thank you again.
All right, Mark. Thank you.
And you have a very good day. Thanks again. This is Mark Scotto with The Independent Musician with Geno Gruber and his storytelling. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Independent Musician. Make sure to visit our website, IronGateRecordsRadio.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate you giving us feedback, or simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in next week for a new episode of The Independent Musician, where the independent musician is the star.